In the summer of 2010, LeBron James didn't just leave his team. He broke an entire city's heart on national television. Millions watched live as the king looked straight into the camera and said, "I'm taking my talents to South Beach." What happened next? Jersey burnings, death threats, an owner calling him a coward and narcissist. LeBron went from beloved hero to the most hated athlete in America overnight. This is the story of the decision, the most controversial moment in LeBron James' life, and how it changed the NBA forever. But that moment did not begin in Miami. It began in Akron, Ohio, long before the cameras, long before the billions, long before the rings, the debates, the banners, and the crown. Before the name became global, LeBron James was a child living a life that could have broken him before basketball ever had a chance to save him. He was born to a teenage mother, Gloria James, who was still trying to figure out her own life when she suddenly had to protect someone else's. There was no stable foundation waiting for them, no safe staircase leading upward, no neatly planned future. There were just hard days, temporary homes, and the pressure of surviving 1 week at a time. Gloria was young, determined, and often overwhelmed. She loved her son fiercely, but love does not magically pay rent, create structure, or erase fear. LeBron's early years were shaped by uncertainty. They moved from place to place. Sometimes they stayed with relatives, sometimes with friends, sometimes wherever there was room. When people talk about poverty in biographies, they often flatten it into a simple fact. But for a child, poverty is not a concept. It is movement. It is instability. It is hearing worry in adult voices. It is feeling that the world around you can change without warning. LeBron grew up without his father, in any meaningful sense. His mother was his center, his shield, and often his entire world. That kind of upbringing leaves marks. It teaches a child to read people quickly. It teaches him to adapt. It teaches him that security is fragile, and that nothing can be taken for granted. Many children carry those lessons as anxiety. Some turn them into fuel. LeBron would do both. Basketball did not arrive in his life as just a hobby. It arrived as order. That is one of the most important things to understand about him. For a child whose home life could feel unsettled, sports offered rules, space, rhythm, and cause and effect. A court was not chaotic. A court made sense. There were boundaries. There was time. There was repetition. There was a clean relationship between work and result. The game gave him something life often could not: control. He loved football too. For a while, it looked as if football might become just as important to his future. He had the size, the speed, and the natural violence of movement that makes defenders look late, even when they are not. He could overpower kids his age without trying to look mean. But basketball had a deeper hold on him. A football play can end in a pile. Basketball never really stops. It flows. It reveals decision-making in real time. It lets brilliance show itself every few seconds. For a mind like LeBron's, that mattered. People noticed him early. Not just because he was bigger, faster, or stronger. There are always kids like that. What made him different was the way he understood the game. He saw openings before others did. He anticipated action instead of reacting to it. He could make the spectacular play, but even more importantly, he could sense when it was coming. That kind of vision cannot be taught easily. It can be sharpened. It can be disciplined. But it usually appears as a gift before it becomes a skill. Still, raw talent is not enough. Plenty of gifted kids disappear. They get distracted. They get exploited. They make one bad choice. Or life simply swallows them before their ability has room to become anything. LeBron's story could have gone that way. That is why the adults around him mattered so much. One of the most significant figures in his childhood was youth football coach Frank Walker. Walker became more than a coach. He became a stabilizing force. LeBron spent time living with the Walker family, which gave him structure he badly needed. Regular meals, routine, a steadier environment, something close to normal. That kind of support may not look dramatic in a highlight reel, but it can change a life more than any dunk ever will. At school, LeBron was already developing into a local phenomenon. But local fame is strange. It can elevate a child and isolate him at the same time. People begin talking about him as if he belongs to everyone. Expectations grow long before the person underneath them is old enough to carry them. LeBron was still just a kid, but whispers were starting. This one is different. This one could really go somewhere. This one might be special. Then came St. Vincent St. Mary High School. That was where the myth started taking visible shape. High school sports in America have produced countless stars. Most of them burn brightly and vanish into ordinary life. A smaller group reach college fame. Only a handful ever seem larger than the system itself. LeBron was in that final category almost immediately. He did not simply become a great high school player. He became an event. His team was good on its own merits, but when LeBron was on the floor, every game started to feel bigger than high school. Crowds grew. Media attention intensified. Out-of-town interest exploded. This was no longer just Akron pride. This was national curiosity. People wanted to see the kid everyone was talking about. The one who looked like a man among boys. The one with the passing vision of a guard and the body of a power forward. The one who could throw down a dunk, block a shot into the dark, and then deliver a cross-court pass, as if the whole game had slowed down for him alone. The rise came fast. Too fast for ordinary teenage life to survive intact. Television cameras arrived. Sports writers followed him. Scouts dissected every possession. Fans traveled to see him. There are high school stars, and then there are future pro legends in waiting. LeBron skipped right past the first category and entered the second while still learning algebra and trying to live like a teenager. That is not normal. That is not healthy in the ordinary sense. But it is the kind of pressure chamber that sometimes produces public figures who stop seeming fully human to the audience. The more people saw him, the more the comparisons escalated. He was not just being called the best player in his class. He was being talked about as if he were already on the way to becoming one of the greats. People reach for names like Magic, Jordan, Bird, and Oscar because ordinary language did not feel sufficient. That kind of praise can sound flattering. It is also dangerous. Once the public starts comparing a teenager to immortals, it no longer has room for him to be young. Then came the Sports Illustrated cover, the phrase that would stay attached to him forever. The chosen one. He was 17 years old, and one of the most influential sports magazines in America placed a near-biblical title on his shoulders. That cover turned hype into prophecy. It was not simply saying that LeBron was talented. It was saying that destiny had already spoken. It suggested inevitability. It suggested that he had not merely been noticed. He had been selected. That label did two things at once. It elevated him to a level of cultural fascination few athletes ever reach, and it ensured that failure would never be treated normally again. An ordinary top prospect can disappoint. A chosen one can only betray expectation. LeBron handled the attention with a calm that seemed strange for his age. He was confident, but not reckless. Polished, but not robotic. He could speak well in interviews. He did not look terrified by the moment. He seemed to understand that the whole machine of sports media had attached itself to him, and he moved inside that machine with unusual comfort. That alone separated him from many young stars. Most kids would either shrink or perform their ego too loudly. LeBron did neither. He looked as if he had already accepted that this was what his life was going to be. At St. Vincent St. Mary, he won state titles and turned games into spectacles. He was not doing it alone. He had close teammates and friends around him, and that mattered. His rise was tied to a group, a brotherhood, a shared experience. That helped keep his early fame from becoming entirely isolating. But even with that support, the scale of the attention was enormous. High school gyms filled with people who were not there to see a school. They were there to witness a pre-professional celebrity. The obvious question hovered over every game. Would he go to college, or was he too big for that already? By the early 2000s, it became clear that college was not going to happen. The NBA was waiting. The draft was waiting. The future had arrived early, and everyone knew it. When the 2003 NBA draft approached, the suspense was mostly ceremonial. The Cleveland Cavaliers held the #1 pick. LeBron was from Akron. The hometown prodigy was about to join the nearest NBA franchise. It felt scripted by someone who understood the emotional weakness of sports fans too well. The local kid would save the local team. The wounded region would be healed by one of its own. That story was almost too perfect. And because it was too perfect, it came with impossible weight. Cleveland was not drafting just a player. It was drafting hope, redemption, relevance, and identity. LeBron was 19 years old. 19. And already people spoke of him as if he were responsible for lifting a city from decades of sports disappointment. It is important to pause there, because that kind of burden changes a person, even if he embraces it, even if he believes he can carry it, even if he wants to. No 19-year-old should have the emotional expectations of a region placed on his back. But that is what happened. His NBA debut only intensified the feeling that something historic was underway. He stepped onto the floor against Sacramento and looked alarmingly comfortable. He scored. He attacked. He created. He did not appear overawed. There was no long adjustment phase, no timid entry, no sense that he needed permission to belong. From the first night, LeBron played like someone who had already pictured this stage in his head 1,000 times. His rookie season validated nearly all of the hype. That by itself was shocking. Most hyped prospects disappoint at least a little in the beginning. Not LeBron. He won Rookie of the Year. He made Cleveland matter. He made the league feel as if it had a new center of gravity. He was not yet at full power, but he was already undeniable. What separated him from many stars was the completeness of his game. He could score, but he was never just a scorer. He could pass like a guard, rebound like a forward, push the break like a point guard, defend multiple positions, see the floor from impossible angles. At his best, he did not simply pile up stats. He shaped games. He dictated tempo. He changed what defenses were allowed to believe. As the years went on, Cleveland improved because LeBron improved faster than everyone around him. He became an all-star, then a superstar, then an MVP. The game seemed to bend around him. He was too fast for many big men, too strong for many wings, too tall for many guards, and too smart for almost everyone. When he drove downhill, he looked like a truck with ballet feet. When he passed, it often felt as if he had already watched the possession before it happened. But with the rise came the first great pressure trap of his career. Could he win in Cleveland? That question sounds innocent. It was not. It was a trap, because no answer other than a championship would ever be treated as enough. The Cavaliers were building around him, but not always brilliantly. The front office made moves, but not all of them put him in a true title environment. He could drag teams higher than they should go, which made people believe the roster was better than it really was. That is one of the cruelest side effects of superstardom. The star covers flaws so well that people forget the flaws exist. Then, when the team falls short, the star absorbs the blame. LeBron's first trip to the NBA Finals in 2007 was a perfect example. He was still very young. He carried Cleveland through the East. His legendary performance against Detroit in the conference finals was the kind of thing that confirms myth in real time. But then the Spurs swept the Cavaliers in the finals. On paper, it looked like failure. In truth, it was proof of both his greatness and his limits within a flawed structure. He was good enough to get there. He was not yet good enough to conquer a dynasty, almost alone. He kept getting better anyway. He won MVP awards. He expanded his command of the game. He became more polished in interviews, more powerful in business, more central to the NBA's identity. By the late 2000s, he was not just a great player. He was the most discussed athlete in American sports. Every playoff run became a referendum. Every postseason defeat became evidence for whatever criticism people already wanted to make. That criticism evolved in interesting ways. At first, it was almost complimentary. He is great, but can he close? Then it sharpened. He passes too much. He is not ruthless enough. He does not have the killer instinct. He is too concerned with making the right play instead of taking the biggest shot. This was always a strange criticism, because it punished intelligence and unselfishness, unless they ended in titles. But that is what happens when the audience decides an athlete must fit a specific mythic template. The template, of course, was Michael Jordan. LeBron could not simply be LeBron. He had to be compared to Jordan at every turn. Was he as cold, as relentless, as selfish in the right moments, as cleanly dominant in the finals? From very early on, LeBron was measured not against ordinary greatness, but against perhaps the most iconic standard the sport had ever created. That comparison would follow him for the rest of his life. Then came the Celtics, then more playoff heartbreak, then mounting suspicion that Cleveland might never build a true champion around him. By 2010, free agency loomed over everything. Everyone knew the choice would be huge, but almost nobody understood how explosive the fallout would become. The decision is one of those moments that now feels larger than sports, because it touched nerves that ran far beyond the game. At the center was a basic fact. LeBron was a free agent and had the right to choose his future. Players are employees. Teams trade them without sentiment all the time. Owners protect franchises, not personal morality. On one level, that is the whole story. But the way LeBron announced it changed everything. The television special was supposed to be an event, a controlled reveal, a chance to raise money for charity, a made-for-TV climax to a summer of speculation. It sounded bold, maybe even modern. But once it aired, the execution turned the moment into a cultural disaster. Because it was not just what he did. It was how it looked. He sat there under the lights while millions watched and waited. Then came the line, the one that has lived forever in sports history. I'm taking my talents to South Beach. In another context, maybe the phrase becomes merely memorable. In that moment, it became a wound. For Cleveland, it was betrayal on live television. Not just departure. Betrayal. Fans did not see a player making a career decision. They saw a hometown savior abandoning them publicly. The difference between those two interpretations is the difference between business and heartbreak. The city exploded. Jerseys burned in the streets. Sports radio became a funeral mixed with a riot. Anger poured out in a way that felt both theatrical and very real. Dan Gilbert, the Cavaliers' owner, released a furious open letter that sounded almost unbelievable in its bitterness. He lashed out at LeBron in public, framing the departure as moral treachery. What should have been a controversial sports move became something closer to civic humiliation. And overnight, LeBron James became the villain of American sports. This transformation was astonishing because of how complete it was. He had spent years as the chosen son of Ohio, the polished young king, the face of the future. Then, in a single evening, he became selfish, disloyal, arrogant, and ungrateful in the minds of millions. The emotional reversal was so intense that it revealed something deeply unstable about fame itself. People do not only love their idols, they also wait for permission to turn on them. There were layers to the reaction. One layer was simple sports emotion. Cleveland had invested its hopes in him and now felt abandoned. Another layer was envy and resentment. LeBron had taken control of his own destiny in a way that many people found threatening. A third layer, harder and more uncomfortable, involved race, power, and public expectations. When certain athletes assert control with confidence, they are praised as savvy. When others do it, they are called selfish. LeBron's freedom did not just upset people because he left. It upset them because he did it on his own terms. Then Miami made the optics even worse. When LeBron joined forces with Dwyane Wade and Chris Bosh, the Heat instantly became the league's most glamorous and most hated team. At their welcome celebration, the atmosphere felt like a coronation. Smoke, music, crowd energy, big promises. Then LeBron delivered another quote that would haunt him for years. Not one, not two, not three. He was talking about championships. The audience roared. Critics sharpened their knives. Because now the story was no longer just that he had left Cleveland badly. It was that he seemed intoxicated by spectacle. He had not yet won a title in Miami. He had not yet justified the superteam experiment. But he was already speaking as if the future belonged to him. To many people, it sounded arrogant. To others, it sounded fun. But in public memory, that moment fused with the decision and built the image of LeBron as a star who had crowned himself too early. The 2010-11 season became one of the most emotionally charged years any athlete has faced. Every road arena treated Miami like a traveling villain show. Booze poured down everywhere. Fans who did not even care about Cleveland suddenly cared about seeing LeBron fail. The Heat were not just a contender, they were a morality play. If they lost, it would feel like justice to millions of people. LeBron played well through much of the year. Miami reached the finals. And there, against the Dallas Mavericks, came the collapse that nearly defined him forever. There are losses, and then there are defeats that rewrite how the world sees you. The 2011 finals were the second kind. LeBron did not simply lose. He looked psychologically trapped, passive at times, tentative at times, absent in ways that made no sense considering his talent. The Mavericks were disciplined, experienced, and inspired. Dirk Nowitzki was sublime. Dallas played with belief and intelligence. But much of the lasting memory of that series comes from shock at LeBron's struggles. How could someone that gifted seem to withdraw at crucial moments? How could the most physically overwhelming player in the league appear to lose contact with his own force. The criticism after that loss was merciless. He was called mentally weak. He was called a fraud. People said he was scared of the moment. Some commentators spoke of him as if he had failed not just athletically, but spiritually. It was one of the most public modern humiliations a superstar athlete has ever endured. This is where LeBron's biography becomes truly compelling, because 2011 could have destroyed the entire narrative. A different player might have become defensive, bitter, or permanently fractured. A different player might have started protecting himself from pressure rather than attacking it. But for LeBron, that humiliation became a turning point. He changed after 2011. The transformation was not theatrical. It did not happen in a single interview or one dramatic quote. It happened in the way he approached the game. He got stronger in the post, more patient, more punishing, more willing to impose his will without overthinking every possession. Miami's internal culture mattered here. Pat Riley's standards, Eric Spoelstra's discipline, Wade's presence, the constant demand for conditioning and seriousness. LeBron had joined Miami to win titles. Instead, Miami first forced him to become someone tougher. In 2012, the pressure returned with even greater force. The Heat were deep in the playoffs again, and when they fell behind the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, the whole experiment teetered. If Miami lost that series, the questions would have become unbearable. Maybe he still couldn't do it. Maybe the super team was soft. Maybe the decision had not just been hated. Maybe it had been doomed. Then came Game 6 in Boston. It remains one of the defining performances of LeBron's life. There was something eerie about the way he played that night. He looked stripped of decoration. No extra emotion. No need for validation. No attempt to charm anyone. He walked into one of the most hostile arenas in basketball and delivered a masterpiece with the expression of a man who had reached a private conclusion. He scored. He rebounded. He dominated. More importantly, he radiated inevitability. The game felt over long before the final buzzer, because his level of concentration was so absolute. That night changed everything. It did not win him a title by itself, but it changed the emotional architecture of his career. Game 6 in Boston was the night LeBron stopped playing like a man asking permission to be great. He simply took over. Miami went on to win the series. Then came the 2012 NBA Finals against Oklahoma City. LeBron was brilliant. Not tentative, not frightened, not haunted by the old story. He finally won his first championship. The confetti fell, and with it, one of the heaviest burdens any modern athlete has carried. He had done it. He had a ring. The oldest, ugliest argument against him was dead. A year later, he was even better. The 2012-13 season often gets remembered as the peak of his powers. He was efficient in ways that seemed almost absurd. He controlled games without wasting motion. He scored without forcing. He defended at an elite level. He read the floor like a conductor. His game looked complete in a way that very few players have ever achieved. Then came the 2013 Finals against the Spurs, one of the greatest series ever played, and one of the strangest. San Antonio was disciplined, elegant, and merciless in its precision. Miami was explosive, star-heavy, and under immense pressure. The series swung on moments that now feel carved into basketball mythology. Most famous of all was Game 6. The Heat were seconds from elimination. Fans were leaving. The title looked gone. Then Chris Bosh got the rebound. Ray Allen drifted to the corner with impossible balance. Catch, turn, fire, three. That shot changed basketball history. It saved Miami. It preserved the Heat era from a brutal alternate legacy. And it gave LeBron the chance to finish the job in Game 7, which he did. 2 titles, 2 Finals MVPs. The villain had become a champion, not universally loved, not beyond criticism, but undeniably fulfilled. And yet, even after Miami gave him everything Cleveland could not, there remained one emotional loose end. Home. That is what made his 2014 decision to return to Cleveland so powerful. This time, there was no TV spectacle. No staged reveal. No national theater designed around suspense. The message was more mature, more reflective, and much more emotionally intelligent. He wrote about home, about Akron, about what it meant to return. Whether one saw it as sincere, strategic, or both, it landed. The prodigal son was coming back. Cleveland did something remarkable. It forgave him. That tells you how deep sports longing can go. The city that had burned his jersey was ready to believe again, because he had given them the one thing that matters in sports morality, the possibility of hope returning. He came back not because he needed Cleveland for his reputation alone. He came back because unfinished business had become too central to his myth. This second Cleveland chapter carried a pressure even heavier than the first. In the first act, he had been the rising prodigy trying to deliver. Now he was the matured champion, returning to fulfill prophecy. The stakes were no longer vague. The ending had a shape. He had to win a title there. Anything else would feel emotionally incomplete. The Cavaliers built around him with Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love. There was talent, there was excitement, there was also instability, injuries, and the reality that team building is never as simple as collecting names. In 2015, Cleveland reached the finals, but got hit by terrible injury luck. Love was out. Kyrie went down. LeBron was spectacular, but Golden State won the series. Cleveland had come close, but not close enough. Still, that loss set the stage for the most meaningful achievement of his career. By 2016, the Warriors were a machine. A dazzling, modern, terrifying machine. They won 73 games in the regular season, an NBA record. Stephen Curry was redefining the geometry of offense. Golden State felt like the future. When the finals began, Cleveland was dangerous, but the Warriors still looked overwhelming. Then the Cavaliers fell behind 3-1. That should have been the end. No team had ever come back from a 3-1 deficit in the NBA Finals. Not ever. This is where LeBron's story reached the kind of scale that turns sports into folklore. He did not simply play well after that. He played with the urgency of someone who understood that this was the hinge of his entire life. Games 5 and 6 were enormous. He attacked relentlessly. He defended with fury. He dragged the series back into possibility. And then came Game 7 in Oakland. Game 7 is not just the most important game of LeBron's career. It may be the game that made his legend emotionally untouchable. The contest was tense, ugly, exhausting, and enormous. Every possession felt loaded with history. Late in the fourth quarter, with the score tied, Andre Iguodala streaked toward the basket for what looked like a go-ahead layup. Then LeBron came flying in from behind. The block. There are famous highlights, and then there are moments that become symbols. That chase-down block became a symbol of everything LeBron was. The speed, the effort, the refusal to surrender, the sheer violence of athletic purpose. It was defense, but it also felt like an act of historical rebellion. He would not let the story end there. Not long after, Kyrie Irving hit the shot over Stephen Curry that will live forever in Cleveland memory. The Cavaliers held on. The buzzer sounded. LeBron collapsed to the floor. And when he cried out, "Cleveland, this is for you," it was not just celebration. It was release. He had done the impossible. He had delivered the city's first major sports championship in more than 50 years. He had come home and fulfilled the myths. He had beaten the greatest regular season team ever after trailing 3-1. There is no cleaner emotional summit in his story than that. If his career had ended that night, the biography would still have been enormous. But it did not end. LeBron kept going, and that too became part of his greatness. The problem was that the league soon tilted even further against him. Kevin Durant joined Golden State, creating a superteam so powerful that it reshaped the competitive balance of the NBA. LeBron continued to reach extraordinary heights, especially in the 2017 and 2018 playoffs, but the mountain in front of him became absurdly steep. The 2018 playoff run, in particular, reminded everyone that even when the title odds looked bleak, LeBron remained capable of near-mythic basketball. He dragged Cleveland through the East with a series of performances that felt more like willpower than sustainability. By the time he reached the finals again, he looked like a man carrying a whole franchise with both hands. Game 1 against Golden State in 2018 was another masterpiece. He scored 51 points in one of the greatest finals performances ever, but it ended in heartbreak after a late-game blunder by J.R. Smith sent the game into overtime. Cleveland never really recovered. The series ended in a sweep. Yet even in defeat, LeBron's performance underscored something essential. His greatness was not dependent on perfect conditions. He could still produce masterpieces in nearly hopeless circumstances. Then came another departure. This time, the emotional reaction was different. He had already given Cleveland its ring. The debt, in the minds of many fans, had been paid. In 2018, LeBron signed with the Los Angeles Lakers. The move opened another chapter in one of the most complicated public careers in sports history. Some people said he was choosing Hollywood over pure basketball. Others believed he was expanding his business empire. Some wondered if he still cared most about winning. The Lakers had glamour, but they were not yet a championship machine. The roster was awkward. The Western Conference was brutal, and LeBron was entering the stage of life where fans begin expecting decline. Then he got injured. A groin strain in his first season in Los Angeles interrupted momentum and helped lead to his first missed playoffs in years. Critics jumped on it immediately. Maybe this was the beginning of the end. Maybe the mileage had finally caught him. Maybe the move to Los Angeles was not the final act of a competitor, but of a mogul preparing life after basketball. LeBron answered the only way he really ever has: by recalibrating, pushing harder, and returning with greater force. The Lakers acquired Anthony Davis, and the 2019-20 season began with renewed purpose. LeBron shifted further into a playmaking role and led the league in assists. At an age when most stars are carefully managing decline, he was still restructuring his game at an elite level. Then the season was interrupted by the pandemic. The world stopped. Sports stopped. Normal life stopped. And in the middle of that upheaval came another tragedy: the death of Kobe Bryant. Kobe's passing hit the basketball world like a shockwave. In Los Angeles, it changed the emotional texture of the season completely. LeBron had passed Kobe on the all-time scoring list the night before the crash. The timing gave the tragedy a surreal and painful intimacy. For the Lakers, for the city, and for LeBron, the season took on a deeper emotional charge. When the NBA resumed, in the Orlando bubble, the environment was unlike anything basketball had ever seen. No travel, no normal crowds, isolation, testing, pressure. The game stripped down to its essentials, but surrounded by anxiety and emotional strain. Some people later tried to diminish that championship because it happened in unusual conditions. That misses the point. The bubble demanded a different kind of resilience: mental endurance, focus without routine, discipline without ordinary release. LeBron adapted again. The Lakers won the 2020 championship. It gave him a fourth ring, a title with a third franchise, another piece of proof that his greatness translated across cities, teammates, systems, and eras. It also gave Los Angeles a season of grief and tribute that felt larger than basketball. By this point, another debate had become inseparable from LeBron's identity: Jordan or LeBron? LeBron or Jordan? The greatest ever or not quite? The argument consumed sports television, barbershops, podcasts, and families. It was no longer simply about who was better. It was about what people valued: perfection in the finals or endurance across decades, scoring titles or total impact, mythic ruthlessness or expansive versatility. Jordan offered one model of basketball greatness. LeBron offered another. LeBron's answer to that debate was never to speak it away. He kept extending the career, kept collecting milestones, kept evolving. That became his strategy against history itself. As he aged, his game changed, but not in the way decline usually looks. He did not simply become less explosive and accept it. He became more manipulative in the best basketball sense. He mastered pace. He weaponized timing. He picked his spots with greater precision. He learned how to preserve energy without surrendering authority. The spectacular young athlete turned into a grandmaster with a tank's body. Then came one of the biggest statistical moments in sports history. LeBron became the NBA's all-time leading scorer. The irony of that record made it especially fitting. For years, critics had said he was too pass-first, too willing to involve others, not selfish enough to dominate as a scorer in the traditional mold. And yet, through extraordinary longevity and consistency, he climbed past every legend above him. He became the top scorer in the history of the league without ever fitting the stereotype of a score-first gunner. That tells you something profound about the scale of his excellence. His later career also brought one of the most intimate and symbolic developments of all: sharing the NBA stage with his son. For a player whose story began in instability, with a teenage mother fighting to hold life together, the image of LeBron later standing in the same league as the next generation of his own family carried emotional weight that statistics cannot measure. It turned the career into a family arc. A story not just about survival and greatness, but about continuity. Off the court, LeBron built something equally vast: business ventures, production companies, endorsements, philanthropic work, a school in Akron, cultural influence that extended far beyond basketball. He became one of the first athletes of his era to fully inhabit the role of mogul, while still performing at an elite level in his sport. That expanded his power. It also expanded the criticism. LeBron has never been a star people simply agree on. Some admire his activism. Others resent it. Some praise his business intelligence. Others see calculation where they wanted simplicity. Some are moved by his loyalty to his inner circle and family. Others distrust the careful image management that comes with modern superstardom. This tension has followed him for years, and it is part of why his biography never gets boring. He is too large, too public, and too layered to settle into one easy interpretation. What makes his life especially compelling for narration is that it contains multiple emotional shapes, not just one. It is not a simple rise. It is a rise, a fall, a public shaming, a transformation, a redemption, another fall, another reinvention, and then a long war against time. That is why the story keeps holding attention. It moves. It turns. It keeps threatening to become one thing and then becoming another. At the center of it all is the pressure of being the chosen one. That phrase was never just a media slogan. It became the atmosphere of his life. LeBron was not allowed to be merely excellent. He was required to fulfill prophecy. Every year that he failed to win a title in Cleveland, the burden grew. Every time he passed in a big moment, instead of forcing a shot, people used it as evidence against him. Every loss was amplified because expectation had become theological. A chosen one is not supposed to lose normally. And yet losing, for LeBron, became part of the making. That is one of the great paradoxes of his biography. Some legends are built from an image of uninterrupted supremacy. LeBron's legend is built partly from the way he responded to visible failure. The decision made him hated. The 2011 finals made him vulnerable. The 2012 Boston game made him terrifying. The 2016 championship made him mythic. Each chapter depends on the previous wound. Without the decision, maybe he remains beloved, but untested in a deeper way. Without 2011, maybe he never undergoes the emotional hardening that Miami forced on him. Without Miami, maybe he never develops the discipline needed for Cleveland's miracle. Without returning home, maybe he remains great, but emotionally unfinished. The story works because it broke. That is what makes him feel less like an athlete and more like a long-form American epic. The child of instability becomes the national prodigy. The prodigy becomes the burdened savior. The savior becomes the villain. The villain becomes the champion. The champion returns home as a penitent. The king fulfills the old prophecy and keeps going long enough to fight time itself. Even his public persona follows this pattern. Early LeBron was carefully polished, almost suspiciously composed for someone so young. Then came a period when he seemed overly aware of perception, trying to be both loved and powerful at once. The backlash of 2010 and 2011 burned that version of him away. Later, LeBron became more openly political, more openly ambitious, more willing to accept that not everyone would like him. That shift did not make him simpler. It made him more interesting. There is also a deeper personal logic connecting the whole arc. A child raised in instability often craves control. Not just financial control, narrative control, environmental control, control over who stays around, control over movement, control over legacy. LeBron's life makes more sense when seen through that lens. He built structure where he had not been given enough of it. He protected relationships that predated fame. He turned his body into a project of near-scientific maintenance. He moved cities when he believed the old arrangement could no longer deliver what was required. He pursued not only championships, but command. That is why the decision mattered so much. It was not just a free agency announcement. It was the most public act of control he had ever exercised. And because it was public, theatrical, and badly staged, it exploded. He had tried to author his own next chapter, and instead triggered a nationwide emotional rebellion. That lesson stayed with him. You can see it in the way he handled later transitions. The return to Cleveland was framed with reflection. The move to Los Angeles felt calmer, more strategic, less like live drama, and more like the next phase of a man building an empire. His family story adds another powerful dimension. For all the scrutiny, LeBron has projected a remarkable consistency in the way he centers family. In a culture that often turns young male stars into cautionary tales, his adulthood has been shaped not by endless public implosion, but by continuity. That does not mean his life has lacked complexity. It means he did something difficult. He took a childhood defined by instability and built an adulthood organized around presence, protection, and visible commitment. That stability gave his later public image a different emotional force. He was not just the athlete aging in public. He was the father aging in public, the husband, the hometown philanthropist, the businessman, the mentor figure. Those roles did not erase the old controversies, but they changed the frame. Over time, the angry villain of 2010 began to look more like an ambitious man who had made one historically clumsy decision in public and spent the following years turning that failure into fuel. And he never stopped giving people reasons to argue. Was he too controlling with roster decisions? Did he wield too much influence behind the scenes? Did his public messaging sometimes feel overly curated? Did his business expansion distract from basketball? Each criticism found believers, but in a strange way, those arguments kept proving how central he remained. People rarely obsess over athletes who have faded into the background. LeBron's every move still mattered because he still mattered. Another reason his biography works so well in narration is that it lives at the intersection of sport, class, race, celebrity, and power. He was a black teenager from Akron, placed under impossible public light, and expected to carry himself with perfection for decades. That expectation was never neutral. When he spoke carefully, some called him corporate. When he spoke boldly, some called him arrogant. When he made business decisions, some framed them as greed. When he returned home, some treated it as image repair. In other words, he was rarely given the luxury of being interpreted generously by everyone at once. He learned to live inside that condition. What makes that even more impressive is the durability of his performance. A great many athletes become consumed by the conversation around them. LeBron has spent most of his life at the center of a national argument and still delivered 20 years of elite basketball. That is extraordinary, not just physically, but mentally. He has had to play with the noise on full volume from adolescence onward. Think about how many versions of the NBA existed during his career. The slower, more physical league he entered, the rise of analytics, the three-point revolution, the pace and space era, the age of player empowerment, the social media era where every expression, quote, and off night can become a permanent clip. LeBron did not just survive these changes. He adapted to each one. That adaptability is a core part of his greatness and often gets lost beneath the bigger headlines. His body, too, became a kind of ongoing project. LeBron treated longevity as craft. Recovery, training, diet, maintenance. He seemed unwilling to surrender to aging in the ordinary way. That discipline made later chapters possible, not because he remained exactly the same player, but because he gave himself the chance to keep evolving instead of collapsing. The older LeBron was not the younger LeBron. He did not need to be. He became something else, less explosive in some areas, more surgical in others, still powerful enough to dominate when necessary, wise enough not to need domination every minute. There is something almost unsettling about watching a superstar stay relevant for so long, that entire generations of players rotate in and out around him. Young stars entered the league after growing up watching LeBron. Then they had to face him. Then some of them became stars, while he was still making All-NBA teams. That kind of longevity changes the emotional scale of a career. It stops feeling like a prime and starts feeling like an era. The audience changes too. Kids who first saw him as a teenager became adults with their own families while he was still on the floor. That creates a rare relationship between public figure and viewer. LeBron is not just someone people watched. He is someone many people grew up with. Their own lives changed while he remained a constant. That makes the biography feel personal, even to strangers. And still, no matter how many chapters came after, the decision remains the hinge. It remains the sentence people hear first when they think of controversy in his life. That is because it was the moment his public identity shattered and reassembled in a new form. Before the decision, he was the chosen son trying to fulfill expectation. After it, He was a test case for athlete autonomy, celebrity optics, and the brutal mechanics of public resentment. The brilliance of the full story is that the decision was both a disaster and a necessity. Not a necessity in the practical sense. He could have left Cleveland in many different ways. But emotionally, mythically, the disaster mattered. It forced him into exile. It burned away innocence. It taught him what love from the public was really worth. And once he knew that, he became freer in some ways and more dangerous in others. The LeBron who walked into Boston in 2012 was not the same man who sat on television in 2010. That older version had felt in control and ended up humiliated. The newer version had suffered enough to understand that control is never total, and that greatness cannot depend on applause. That knowledge gave him a colder center. Another fascinating piece of the biography is how often LeBron has been accused of things that, in another athlete, might be praised. He is strategic, so some call him manipulative. He is image-conscious, so some call him inauthentic. He is outspoken, so some call him self-important. He is collaborative, so some call him less of a killer. He is durable, so some take his longevity for granted. That strange inversion has followed him for years. Perhaps it is the price of scale. The bigger the figure, the more people need him to confirm their own beliefs. But for a narrator, that tension is gold, because it keeps the listener leaning forward. LeBron's life does not settle into one moral. It keeps reframing itself, just when the audience thinks it knows who he is. Another chapter complicates the verdict. That is the engine of addictive storytelling. Not flat praise, not flat criticism. Movement. Take his relationship with Cleveland. At first, he was the prodigy from nearby Akron, the local miracle. Then he became the traitor who left. Then he became the returning son. Then the redeemer. Very few athletes have lived so many contradictory identities with the same city. That alone gives the story unusual emotional density. He was loved there, hated there, forgiven there, and immortalized there. That is not a normal sports relationship. That is tragedy and redemption in civic form. Or consider his relationship with pressure. As a teenager, he handled it with eerie maturity. As a young star, he sometimes seemed trapped by the idea that he had to satisfy everyone at once. During the decision era, he tried to control the spectacle and got swallowed by it. After 2011, he became more willing to let the pressure sharpen him rather than define him. Later, he turned pressure into routine, carrying legacy conversations in public, while still trying to win games in a younger man's league. That progression gives the biography shape. Pressure is not just surrounding the story. Pressure is the story. The same is true of ambition. America loves ambition in theory. In practice, it prefers ambition that arrives in familiar packaging. LeBron's ambition was too large, too visible, too self-aware to fit comfortably inside the old hero mold. He wanted championships. He wanted control. He wanted business power. He wanted historical standing. He wanted to uplift his community. He wanted to shape media. He wanted his voice to matter outside sports. For some people, that range is inspiring. For others, it is irritating. For storytelling, it is perfect, because the biggest public figures are rarely beloved only for their gifts. They become unforgettable because their gifts interact with conflict. LeBron's ability met endless conflict. Poverty, expectation, comparison, backlash, failure, reinvention, age. Those pressures kept his story alive, even when his greatness was already obvious. There is a temptation with icons to oversimplify them into symbols that feel easy to recite. LeBron resists that. He is too sprawling, too changeable, too obviously real in his contradictions. He can look warmly paternal in one moment and ruthlessly calculating in the next. He can seem deeply sincere and highly strategic almost at once. Some people see that complexity and call it branding. Others see it and call it adulthood under unprecedented scrutiny. Either way, the result is the same. He remains difficult to reduce. That difficulty is one reason the Jordan debate never really dies. Jordan's mythology is sharp and focused. It has a cleaner silhouette. LeBron's is broader, more human, more visibly lived in. Jordan can feel like a weapon. LeBron feels like an empire. For some fans, the blade is more compelling. For others, the empire is. The debate says as much about audience psychology as it does about basketball. Still, even if one sets aside all ranking arguments, LeBron's career remains astonishing on its own terms. A child from instability becomes a teenage national phenomenon. He enters the league with impossible hype and mostly lives up to it immediately. He carries a small market franchise to relevance. He becomes a national villain with one disastrously staged decision. He gets publicly broken in a finals loss. He rebuilds himself into a champion. He returns home and delivers one of the greatest titles in sports history. He wins again in Los Angeles. He becomes the all-time leading scorer. He shares the league with his son. That is not merely a resume. That is a saga. And yet, the emotional center may still be his mother. Because every empire in LeBron's life began with Gloria trying to protect him in unstable circumstances. No father shaping the path. No dynasty inheritance. No seamless pipeline from comfort to greatness. Just a young mother and a gifted child trying to stay above water long enough for talent to become opportunity. That beginning matters because it keeps the later scale of the story grounded. The billionaire athlete, the mogul, the icon, the champion, the global face of basketball, all of that emerged from fragility, not privilege. Perhaps that is why LeBron has always seemed driven, not only by ambition, but by accumulation. Not greed, exactly. Accumulation. Of security, of influence, of legacy, of proof. A child who grows up without enough stability may spend adulthood building systems no storm can easily undo. LeBron's career often feels like that, a long campaign against impermanence. There is another subtle reason his biography stays compelling. For all the fame, he never became boring on the floor. Many aging stars turn into symbols before they fully turn into ghosts. LeBron stayed tactically fascinating. He kept adjusting. At times, he became even more enjoyable to watch as a thinker. The younger LeBron was overwhelming. The older LeBron became manipulative in the most sophisticated way. He knew when to slow a game down, when to attack a mismatch, when to conserve, when to strike, and when to turn a simple possession into a psychological test for the defense. That intelligence kept the later chapters from feeling like decline. They felt like evolution. And it is evolution, more than anything, that defines him. Not perfection, not purity, evolution. From child to prodigy, from prodigy to star, from star to burdened savior, from savior to villain, from villain to champion, from champion to redeemer, from redeemer to elder statesman, from elder statesman to historical monument still somehow in motion. Very few public figures survive enough transformations to tell that many truths at once. LeBron did. That is why documentaries keep getting made. Why debates keep restarting. Why every generation that watched him feels it saw a different version. Some remember the teenager on the magazine cover. Some remember the heel turn of 2010. Some remember the cold face in Boston. Some remember the tears in Oakland after the 2016 title. Some remember the bubble ring. Some remember the scoring record. Some remember the father sharing the game with his son. Each memory is valid. All of them are LeBron. And that brings us back to the line that started the storm. I'm taking my talents to South Beach. At the time, that line looked like arrogance, vanity, and betrayal compressed into a single sentence. Now, with years of perspective, it looks different. Still clumsy, still misguided in presentation, still emotionally brutal for Cleveland, but also part of something larger. It was the moment a young superstar tried to seize control of his own narrative before he fully understood what that kind of public control costs. He paid for it, then he learned from it, then he turned the lesson into one of the great second acts in sports. That is why the decision remains the most controversial moment of his life, but not the defining limit of it. It did not imprison him. It transformed him. That distinction is the whole point. LeBron James has lived under spotlight so intense that many people have forgotten how impossible his path really was. To live up to that much hype is rare. To survive that much backlash is rarer. To stay elite for that long, while the entire culture argues over your meaning, is almost unheard of. He has made mistakes, some very public. He has also done something that very few chosen ones ever manage. He grew into the burden instead of collapsing beneath it. That does not mean the story ends in universal agreement. It never will. Some people will always prefer Jordan. Some will always think the decision revealed something unforgivable. Some will say he needed too much help. Some will say his personality is too managed. Others will see him as the most complete basketball player ever, the greatest modern example of living up to impossible expectations, and one of the most consequential athletes in history. The argument itself is part of his legacy. But beyond the debate, there is the simple shape of the life. A boy raised in instability found order in a game. A teenager became a national prophecy. A hometown hero became a national villain. A broken superstar rebuilt himself into a champion. A champion returned home and completed the myth. An aging legend kept rewriting the limits of longevity. A son of Akron became one of the biggest figures sports has ever produced. And all the while, the audience watched in real time. That is what makes the story feel different from older legends. We did not inherit LeBron as a finished myth. The world watched him become one. Awkwardly, publicly, under relentless scrutiny. We saw the raw material, the mistakes, the overconfidence, the hurt, the discipline, the triumph, the reinvention, the aging, the legacy management, the family, the empire. We saw a legend being built while the builder was still alive inside it. That kind of access changes everything. It makes admiration more complicated. It makes criticism more personal. It makes the biography more alive. And it makes the biggest moments feel less like distant history and more like shared memory. People remember where they were for the decision. People remember where they were for the 2016 finals. People remember the scoring record. They remember the debates in between. LeBron's career has been less like a sequence of seasons and more like a chain of public events that helped define entire eras of basketball culture. It is easy to say now that he always looked destined. That smooths away too much. Destiny is not what it feels like from the inside. From the inside, it probably felt like noise, pressure, strategy, exhaustion, and the constant threat of public failure. The audience saw a chosen one. LeBron had to live as a human being inside that title. That may be the hardest part of his story to appreciate. Not the highlight plays, not the championships, but the daily psychological labor of functioning under prophetic expectation for more than 2 decades. And still, through all of it, the love of the game never fully disappeared. That matters, because many icons become so burdened by meaning that joy drains out of them. With LeBron, the joy still flashes, in a pass no one expected, in a grin after a ridiculous shot, in the delight of manipulating a defense, in the theatrical energy of a fast break. That joy keeps the biography from becoming too heavy. It reminds the listener that beneath the empire, beneath the controversy, beneath the pressure, there was always a kid who found freedom on a court. Maybe that is the truest through line of all. Akron gave him instability. Basketball gave him shape. Fame gave him burden. Failure gave him depth. Victory gave him legitimacy. Return gave him emotional completion. Longevity gave him scale. But the court always gave him language. That is where he understood himself first. That is where the chaos turned into patterns. That is where the chosen one became real enough to survive the title. So when people tell the LeBron James story, they often start with greatness and move outward. A better way is to start with fracture and move toward form. Start with the teenage mother. Start with the instability. Start with the child learning to adapt. Then the game makes sense. Then the hunger makes sense. Then the need for control makes sense. Then the decision makes sense. Then Miami's discipline makes sense. Then the return to Cleveland makes sense. Then the war against aging makes sense. Everything is connected. In that sense, LeBron's biography is not only about basketball. It is about what happens when a person who begins in fragility is handed enormous power and must learn how to use it without losing himself. Sometimes he handled that brilliantly. Sometimes he handled it badly. That is what makes the story human rather than sterile. He was not a perfect machine. He was a prodigy trying to become a man, while the world treated him as a symbol. The symbol changed many times. The person had to keep going. That may be why his biggest victories feel so emotional. Not because basketball titles are inherently profound, but because in LeBron's case, they often resolved deeper narrative tensions. The 2012 ring ended the can't-win accusation. The 2013 ring confirmed Miami was no fluke. The 2016 ring healed the Cleveland wound. The 2020 ring expanded the legacy across another franchise and another era. Each title answered a different emotional question, and each question had been asked loudly. Could the chosen one survive the hype? Yes. Could the hometown savior carry Cleveland? Almost, but not yet. Could the villain ever be respected again? Yes, through winning. Could the failed finals superstar become mentally stronger? Yes, spectacularly. Could the prodigal son truly come home? Yes. Could he beat history itself, down 3-1, against the greatest regular season team ever? Yes. Could he adapt into old age and still matter? Yes. Could he keep expanding the boundaries of what an athlete could be off the court? Also yes. That accumulation of yes is why his story feels so large. Not because every year ended perfectly, because enough massive questions were answered in public, one after another, that the overall shape became undeniable. It is possible that future generations will flatten parts of it. They may remember the records and forget the emotional climate. They may see the statistics and miss the pressure. They may know the facts of the decision without understanding how hated he became. They may know he came back to Cleveland without feeling what that meant to a city starved for triumph. That is why narration matters. Because good narration restores feeling to facts. It reminds people not just what happened, but what it felt like when it happened. What did it feel like when the Sports Illustrated cover called a teenager the chosen one? It felt electric, excessive, and dangerous. What did it feel like when he said he was taking his talents to South Beach? It felt like a bomb going off in the emotional center of Cleveland. What did it feel like when he vanished against Dallas in 2011? It felt like the whole country had proof of his weakness. What did it feel like when he walked into Boston in 2012 and played like a man with ice in his blood? It felt like a transformation in real time. What did it feel like when he cried on the floor in 2016? It felt like prophecy completed through suffering. What did it feel like when he broke the scoring record? It felt like history surrendering to endurance. That is LeBron James. Not one feeling. Many. Not one version. Many. Not one arc. Many arcs layered into one immense public life. The decision may have been the most controversial moment, but it was never the whole man. It was the rupture that made the later redemption possible. It was the mistake that burned away innocence. It was the fire before the steel. And that is why the story still grips people, because it contains one of the most satisfying narrative structures in modern sports. The chosen one falls. The world turns on him. He changes. He rises. And when he returns to the place he once broke, he gives it the one thing it had wanted from him all along. A lesser biography would end there. A cleaner biography would. But LeBron's did not. He kept going. He kept adding layers. He kept complicating the verdict. He kept extending the era. He kept refusing to become just a memory. Maybe that is the final mark of his greatness. Not only that he was brilliant, not only that he won, but that he remained alive as a story for so long. Stories usually harden. They become museum pieces. LeBron's story stayed in motion. That is harder. One day the games will stop for good. The arguments will remain. The records may eventually fall. New stars will rise. New eras will take shape. But the full LeBron James story will still feel unusually modern because it was lived under total visibility. The rise of social media, the age of player empowerment, the merging of athlete, corporation, activist, producer, father, and icon. He did not just play through those changes. He embodied them. So the biography of LeBron James is not only the biography of one man. It is the biography of how sports celebrity changed in the 21st century. How a teenager became a global brand before adulthood. How free agency became spectacle. How backlash became content. How redemption could still happen at scale. How longevity became a form of dominance. How one athlete could carry the emotional attention of the league for 20 years and still be unfinished. And it all circles back to that summer night in 2010. The sentence, the fury, the burning jerseys, the broken trust, the owner's public rage, the national backlash, the creation of a villain. At the time, it looked like the moment that would define him forever in the worst way. Instead, it became the fracture line through which the deeper story emerged. The version of LeBron who needed to be loved by everyone did not survive the decision. The version who came after was stronger, harsher, smarter, and more complete. That is why the story matters. Not because it was pretty, because it was ugly and still led somewhere extraordinary. LeBron James did not live a perfect life in sports. He lived a dramatic one, a difficult one, a heavily watched one, a transformational one. From Akron to superstardom, from Cleveland to Miami, from humiliation to championships, from exile to redemption, from youth to empire, from promise to proof. And if there is one final truth underneath all of it, it may be this: LeBron James was never just trying to be great. He was trying to become unbreakable. That is what the childhood demanded. That is what the hype demanded. That is what the decision demanded. That is what 2011 demanded. That is what 2016 proved. The world called him the chosen one before he was old enough to understand what that meant. Then it tested whether he could survive the weight of the title. Again and again. On the court, in the media, in public opinion, in legacy debates, in time itself. And somehow, through all the noise, he did more than survive. He turned the burden into one of the greatest careers the sport has ever seen. So yes, the decision was the most controversial moment in LeBron James' life. Yes, it broke a city's heart. Yes, it turned him into the most hated athlete in America, almost overnight. But it was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of the hardest, richest, most revealing chapter. Because after the cameras faded, after the backlash exploded, after the image cracked, after the world decided it knew who he was, LeBron James still had the rest of his life to answer back. And that answer did not come as one quote, or one game, or one title. It came as a career so vast, so turbulent, so accomplished, and so publicly lived, that by the end, the kid from Akron was no longer just a basketball star. He was a saga. He was an era. He was a symbol. He was a wound and a redemption. He was proof that greatness can be messy, that legends can be hated, that failure can become fuel, and that sometimes the most controversial moment in a life is not the thing that destroys the story. It is the thing that makes the story unforgettable.